Join me tonight on Twitch at 11:30 p.m. Eastern at the conclusion of Sunday Night Football, where we'll talk about everything that happened in Week 9 of the NFL season. Plus, I'll have my thoughts about the Jaguars and see if they can snap this 5-game losing streak of theirs. Link to join below. And now, on with our feature presentation. Ray Guy is hands down the greatest punter in the history of the NFL. I'm not even sure there can be too much of a debate about that, as he single-handedly revitalized the entire position, defined what it meant for a punter to be a weapon that can flip the field, and is the only punter currently enshrined in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Whether there should be more punters in there is up for you to decide, but one thing is very clear. If there was ever only going to be one punter in the Hall, then Ray Guy is the only guy that it could have been. I would be here all day if I listed every single accolade that Guy won and received throughout his illustrious career. As a first-round pick, he received 7 Pro Bowl nominations, including 6 straight in each of his first 6 seasons from 1973 to 78. He led the NFL in yards per punt 3 times, leading the league in this category in 1974, 1975, and 1977, finishing second 3 times, and finishing inside the top 5 a whopping 10 times, doing it every year from 1973 to 83, with the exception of the strike-shortened 1982 season. He's a 3-time Super Bowl champion, with many calling his performance at Super Bowl 18 the greatest performance by any punter in a Super Bowl. And not only is he a member of the All-1970s team, but he's one of just 2 punters on the 100th anniversary team, along with another former Raider, Shane Leckler. In fact, Ray Guy was so good that famously, after a 1977 game against the Houston Oilers, Guy was kicking the ball so well that the Oilers took the footballs back to Houston with them to inspect them and make sure they weren't deflated or had any extra helium in them. They found nothing wrong. Guy was just that good. When you have other teams suspicious that you're cheating, they conduct their own investigation and realize that you're not cheating, and instead, that you're just head and shoulders above anyone else to ever play the position, that's when you know you're in a class of your own. As Pittsburgh Steelers head coach Chuck Noll once said on how good Guy was, summing it up incredibly nicely, Ray is unquestionably the best in the league. I don't know of anybody that is a close second. And yes, there are so many stories about how good Ray Guy was. You've probably heard a bunch of them. But I guarantee you that you haven't heard this one, because he was so good that he had other people impersonating him in order to get jobs in the NFL. Seriously. And it actually worked to an extent. Imagine if I called up an NFL team right now and asked them for a tryout, claiming that I was Patrick Mahomes, the cousin of Patrick Mahomes. Nobody would buy that. Not for a second. But in 1977, the Los Angeles Rams, looking for a specialist of their own who could be a weapon, tried to sign Ray Guy. Not that Ray Guy, not the punter that was with the Raiders on the highest contract ever given to a punter in NFL history at the time, a completely different person named Ray Guy. And this is the story behind what has to be, considering the circumstances, the funniest and the craziest moment in the illustrious career of Ray Guy, even though it technically had nothing to do with him whatsoever. Before I talk about the actual incident in question and how absolutely bizarre it was, because let's be real, with the internet and social media and with verification every step of the way, nothing like this could ever happen again. We need some context to understand why the Rams were looking for a specialist in the first place, and how they seemingly got their prayers answered when Ray Guy appeared from the heavens. The year is 1977, and on the surface, it seemed as though the Rams were having some major trouble at the kicker position. It seemed like the Rams were ready to roll into the season with Tom Dempsey as their kicker, and it made sense as to why. Aside from the fact that the man obviously had a cannon for a leg, as he famously hit an NFL record 63-yard field goal back in a 1970 game against the Detroit Lions while playing for the New Orleans Saints, he was extremely accurate, hitting over 80% of his kicks for the Rams in 1975, which was 3rd in the NFL, and hitting over 65% of his kicks in 1976, which was inside the top 10. As a side note, To learn more about the great career of the late Tom Dempsey, click the card in the upper right corner. However, Dempsey had an absolutely horrible training camp, where reports indicate that he was missing over 50% of his kicks. And with that, the Rams decided to roll with this guy right here. This is Raphael Septien. Now you might know him best as the kicker of the Dallas Cowboys from 1978 to 86, and as the guy who was a first-team All-Pro with them in 1981. However, in 1977, he was an unknown rookie who was the starting kicker of the Rams after the New Orleans Saints, who drafted him earlier in the year with their 10th round pick, decided to cut him because they had no use for him. And even though Septien was the kicker, he wasn't exactly the kicker by choice. It's not that he was good in the eyes of the coaching staff, it's that he seemed like the least bad option. As Septien said when he arrived to the Rams, they hardly paid any attention to me for about the first 3 days. Another problem with Septien was that he was not exactly the tallest player in the world, standing at only 5 feet 9 inches tall, meaning that his kicks were susceptible to getting blocked, and by his own admission, he couldn't get a whole lot of height on his kicks. And it's not like the Rams had a ton of reason to believe in him. When he played in college, he hit on 32 out of 66 kicks, hitting just 48% of the time. Even by the standards of the 70s, when kickers were nowhere near as good as they are today, a field goal percentage of 48% is awful. And one writer did a power ranking of every single place kicker in the NFL through the first few weeks of the 1977 season. And while you had your usual kickers like Jan Stenerud, Jim Bakken, and Gary Apremia near the top, you had Raphael Septien way near the bottom, coming in 24th in a 28-team league. While the Rams were off to a good start in 1977, it was not because of Septien, who had missed at least one kick in every game thus far. He missed an extra point in Week 1 against the Atlanta Falcons, missed a field goal in Week 2 against the Philadelphia Eagles, and missed a field goal in Week 3 against the San Francisco 49ers. Long story short, if the Rams could find an upgrade at the kicker position, they were going to do it. By no means was Septien their guy. There was tons of room for improvement. If only they had a specialist like Ray Guy on their team. Someone like Guy who has a strong leg, who can kick field goals, even though he wasn't asked to in the NFL, and someone who could change the entire complexion of the game with his leg. Heck, to start off the 1977 season, Guy was picking up right where he left off, and was showing no signs of slowing down as the #1 punter in all of football. He was averaging 44.6 yards per punt, which was an astronomically high number. For some perspective, in 1976, the league leader in that category was Marv Bateman of the Buffalo Bills, who was averaging 42.8 yards per punt. Through 3 games, Guy was 2 yards ahead of the league leader from last year. The league average was somewhere in the ballpark of 39 yards, and Guy was nearly 6 yards better than that so far in 1977. If the Rams could have a Ray Guy of their own for field goals, that would be the dream. That would be the missing piece to get them over the hump in the playoffs and beat teams like Dallas and Washington, having a kicker that they could depend on. And sure enough, they got their prayers answered. Because after the Rams' 34-14 win over the San Francisco 49ers, where Septien missed a field goal, the Rams kicking coach got a phone call. And on the other end of the line was none other than Ray Guy himself. Kind of. The guy somehow got the kicking coach's number and told him that you're not going to believe me, but my name is Ray Guy. I'm from Mississippi, I'm Ray Guy's cousin, and I can kick a football. Just give me a chance, and I can show you what I can do. Now you would think that the Rams and their kicking coach would try and verify this in some way, or at the very least, see that this guy could actually kick. That's kind of important. Maybe have him send in some film of him kicking field goals. Maybe have him fax over some form of identification. Maybe ask him some questions about the actual Ray Guy to see if he's telling the truth or if he's bluffing. There were a bunch of things that the Rams could have done in this situation. However, that's how good the Raiders punter Ray Guy was. Because he was so good that the Rams, upon hearing the news that there was another Ray Guy in the world and he wanted to join the Rams, just allowed him to come down to the facility and try out for the team. No questions asked. The Rams had a game to get ready for, by the way. They had to have their coaches game planning for their big game on the road against the Chicago Bears. But here they found themselves, giving a tryout to a player who had 0 college stats, and could have been lying for all we know, and was claiming, with no verifiable proof whatsoever, that he was Ray Guy's cousin. So that raises the ultimate question. How did the tryout go? Well, the good news was that the Rams found their Ray Guy. The bad news was that this version of Ray Guy, in no uncertain terms, absolutely stunk. Unsurprisingly, I have no highlights of the imitator Ray Guy, who may or may not have been telling the truth about being the actual Ray Guy's cousin, so you're just gonna have to settle for watching some highlights of the actual good specialist instead. When this Ray Guy showed up for tryouts, they had him try a 40-yard field goal. Not only did Guy miss the field goal, but he missed it well short. Alright, maybe some early jitters. Maybe he just needed a warm-up kick to get everything out of his system. So they had him try another 40-yarder. And sure enough, this one also missed short. By this point, the Rams were realizing what a horrible mistake they were making, and what a giant waste of time this all was. In other words, the Rams coaching staff was saying this to each other.
We've been duped!
Duped!
Bamboozled!
We've been speckledorfed!
That's not even a word, and I agree with you.
At this point, the kicking coach went up to Guy and said, "You must be Ray Guy the second, because you sure as hell aren't Ray Guy the first." But Guy had to defend his innocence. He swore that he was telling the truth, and that he was related to Guy and deserved the job, even though he clearly didn't realize that nepotism might get your foot in the door, but you still gotta take advantage of this. I could be the son of LaDainian Tomlinson and say that I want to try out for an NFL team, but when the coaching staff sees me struggle to run a sub 740, they're not giving me the job just because of my last name. So Guy did what any logical person would do in this situation. Completely missing the point, he said that he could prove that he was related to the Raiders punter, and decided to call up the actual Ray Guy. However, there was no speakerphone, and none of the coaches at any point went to the phone to listen in, meaning that quite literally, anyone could have been on the other end of the line for all we knew. After the conversation on the phone between Ray Guy and Ray Guy, and I'm using the biggest air quotes possible, the imposter guy said that the punter guy said that you should give him another chance, because his shoes weren't good. Maybe if he had a new pair of shoes, he'd be able to kick like he did back in Mississippi, and truly show that he was related to the punter not just in name, but in skill. And at this point, finally, after all of this nonsense, the Rams weren't having any of it. Their BS radar was through the roof, and the kicking coach told Guy where he could get a new pair of shoes, and that he should come back in March and try again. From all accounts, he never did. This whole story is just one of those things that gets more bizarre the further along it goes, almost like it's out of a comedy sketch. The Rams went along with this, and they, being so desperate for a kicker, actually got duped to some extent in believing that this was actually the cousin of Ray Guy. The imposter then called up Guy, but didn't let anyone listen in on the conversation. For all we know, when he was on the phone, he could have been talking to his girlfriend, who you wouldn't really know because she lives in Canada. And then, I guess, maybe, this was a really elaborate ploy to try and get a free pair of shoes? Which, if this was how he went about it, and he truly was from Mississippi, and drove or flew all the way to Los Angeles to do that, because he couldn't have been that delusional to actually think he was going to win a job, then that is quite possibly the worst and dumbest plan I've ever heard by anyone in my life. I'm genuinely at a loss for words, because no part of this story makes any sense. Remember, folks, this was the organization that was winning the NFC West every single year in the 1970s. The Falcons, Saints, and 49ers were so bad that they couldn't win a division where the top team was getting completely duped by a random guy. But I guess, in an absolutely crazy way, this shows just how good the actual Ray Guy was, and why many people consider him to be the greatest punter of all time. He was so good that if you even claimed to be related to him, you were offered an opportunity for a job. I'm not sure how many other players in the history of sports, let alone the history of the NFL, can say that about themselves. whether the fake Ray Guy was actually named Ray Guy, seeing as he never showed any identification, and whether he was actually related to the real Ray Guy, I'll let you be the judge of that. But as skeptical as you can be of whether he was telling the truth or not, you can't be skeptical of this. Ray Guy was an unbelievable punter, and was the greatest to ever do it. Rest in peace to one of the greatest to ever play this sport. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.